there's a lot of stress that comes with overhead.
That's the hill you've got to climb.
Oh, a new month's coming. There's going to be insurance payment, electrical utilities, the rent, and all this stuff.
Nowadays, your software that you have to pay, your cell phones, your whole technology stack, salaried employees. It's all these things that you have.
It's just looming overhead.
They recur every month, whether you sell anything or not.
Let's talk about decreasing your overhead.
To manage overhead, you need to first not add it. Say, if I didn't have that, would I add it today? And if the answer is no, then you need to get rid of it. Second thing is
expert advice, practical tips, real-life stories. Have less stress, more time, and more money in your business. Welcome to the Cash Flow Contractor.
Martin, there's never-ending things that we could talk about. Sometimes we should just record our conversations that have nothing to do with contracting, but it's a struggle to get started some of these times. We just keep talking and talking. But back to a financial topic now. We haven't had a financial topic, I feel like, in a while, and we're talking about managing overhead. So listeners probably understand what overhead is. If you've listened to our podcast a lot and you don't know what it is, then we're worried about you. But let's just make it really basic. How can we understand overhead? What is it? Let's just start there.
Well, I don't think that everybody knows what overhead is. Everybody uses the word, but I was looking in Chat GPT this morning. I said, tell me a little something about overhead. And it proceeded to name overhead is broken into two components. One is fixed and one is variable cost. The other is what combinations that are fixed and that's completely wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, I corrected Chat GPT and I'm sure it'll be right from here on out. But no, it was completely wrong. Just exactly opposite wrong. So I don't presume. I never even presume that I know. I always like to ask people when we're talking about financial topics what they mean by cash flow and what they mean by cash throw off and what do they mean by profit, because you'll find that there are a lot of different answers for that. But here, overhead is there are really two kinds of expense. One is called variable cost, which we've talked about a lot. That's cost that goes up and down with sales. So if you, generally speaking, if you double your sales, you double your variable cost. It's things like material and labor, right? The other, that one being variable cost, the other is fixed costs or overhead costs. And it's expenses that you have that are based really on time. They repeat every month or every quarter or some period of time, and they're independent of sales. So the way you generally like to look at them is there are monthly costs that recur every month that you pay out. For example, rent, your phone bill, perhaps your insurance bill if you pay it, your copier lease, your salaries to the people who work in your office. So they're completely different than variable costs because of the way they behave. You have your overhead costs, they recur every month, whether you sell anything or not.
Yeah. And why is it called overhead? That's a question I have.
Had you asked me that when I had Chat GPT, I think because it used to mean the roof over your head and the lights and I think.
So here's you've given a good definition of overhead. And I think that there's a lot of stress that comes with overhead. And the way that I thought about it is it's just looming over your head. And it's like, oh, a new month's coming. There's going to be insurance payment, electrical utilities, then the rent and all this stuff. And I've got to pay payroll. It's just looming overhead. And so that's kind of what I was
thinking. I think that's a better definition than mine. Mine was a little more technical. Yours is a little more realistic. Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a real impact of overhead on you as a individual, as a business owner of, man, I've got to carry all of this every single month. And I think it weighs on people more than they care to admit. And it is, it's just one thing after another. And we'll talk about ways of managing it and making decisions around overhead. But what is the impact of overhead just in your business financials? What is that? What can you be tracking with your overhead?
Well, it's one of the components of break even.
Yep.
And therefore it's one of the most important numbers that you have. You divide your overhead by your gross profit margin percentage, and it tells you how much you have to sell before you start making an actual net profit every month. And you know us by now, that's my number one KPI. You have to know what your margins are and what your break even. Okay.
You just used a lot of terms there, and I understand it, but I want to go through like so our overhead is $10,000. Let's just start there.
Okay. Our overhead's $10,000. Let's say our margins, our gross profit margins are 50%. In other words, I sell something for $1 and it costs me 50 cents. I make 50 cents, 50%. So
Okay.
if I want to know how much I have to sell every month and my overhead's $10,000, I divide it by 50 cents, which
Okay.
I happen to know is $20,000. So I do not start making any money until I've sold $20,000. The next dollar, $20,001, I make 50%, 50 cent net profit. Make sense?
No, that makes total sense. So basically, we need to know our overhead number. We also need to know what our gross profit margin is. And then we take our overhead divided by the gross profit margin. That gets us how much money we need to make every single month just to break even, not make a profit.
Right. Right. That's the nut. That's the hill you've got to climb. And it is important to emphasize that until you hit break even, you make nothing. So you sell $19,000 in a month in our case, and you make nothing. As a matter of fact, you lose
You lose 1,000. Yeah.
50 bucks. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or 500 bucks. Yeah. It's important that you understand that. So if you can reduce your overhead, you hit your break even earlier in the month, and you have more days at which you are earning a profit instead of just paying overhead. And I'll give you an example of a client who walked in here. Well, they sent me an email 2 weeks ago, and they said, we just noticed something. Let's see if I can say this without giving away all their numbers. But they said the first half of the year, last year, we made, I'll just give you some numbers proportionately correct. We sold a certain amount and we made $40,000, 40% of our sales, and we made $32,000 in the first half of the year. In the second half of the year, they had 60% of their sales, but they made 132,000. So 32 divided, that's 5 times as much. They sold more. They sold 40% in the first. They sold 60% in the second half of the year, but they made 5 times as much.
And that's because every dollar you make over break even is pure profit, right?
Correct. Correct. They hit break even sooner. They also raised their margins a little bit, which contributed, but wasn't so. So they had a higher margin, but they hit their break even sooner. They had a higher margin and they had higher sales. So they were at above break even longer, and they were shocked by it. And that's kind of my point in my book is that you will be, when you do that, you'll be shocked. You say, well, I made all this money. That can't be right. Yeah, I did more, but it doesn't seem like it. Well, that's, half of that equation is getting your margins up, which we talk about a lot elsewhere. The other half is getting your overhead down so that you hit your break even faster, sooner.
Okay. So let's talk about those two things, hitting break even sooner in the month and then also decreasing your overhead. So what are some strategies for companies to hit their break even sooner in the month so that the rest of the month is more profit?
Well, that is going to be a little bit maybe not exactly the same subject as overhead, but obviously you want to sell more. You want to be more efficient. We've talked a lot of times about you're at the job and there's 2 hours left and everybody goes home because they don't want them on overtime. So they go back out there again tomorrow. And so instead of 2 hours of overtime, you have 8 hours of regular time, and you have a job you didn't do that you could have done because you were going back. So they're that kind of operating decisions. But the kind of interesting one that I think I'd like to talk about, emphasize today is how do you reduce overhead? And I'll start it by reiterating what it is. It's things like rent, it's insurance, it's your utility bill, it's your, nowadays, your software that you have to pay, your cell phones, your whole technology stack. It's your office staff,
Salaried
so
employees.
salaried employees. It's all these things that you have. A lot of people say, what should overhead be as a percentage of sales? That's hard for me to just say because different companies have different structures. But I will say, for most of our listeners, if you're running with 10 or 15% overhead, meaning 10, your overhead is 10 or 15% of sales, that's really good.
Hmm.
If you're up in the 35s or 40s, it's really, I'm going to say, bad. And
Okay.
it just makes sense. If you have a 40% margin left over after you take off variable costs and you have 40% sales, there's 0.0 left for net profit,
Hmm.
right? So one of the first things is to go figure out what your overhead is as a percentage sale. And if you are a new company, be very reluctant to increase your overhead. It's really, really easy to increase overhead. I need a new machine. I need a new truck. I need a bigger space. I need more people. Uh, it may be true,
Yeah.
but be very reluctant to do that because on the other side, it's very hard to get your overhead down once it's up.
Yeah. It's always harder to remove something than it is to add something. That's why, even in writing, it's easier to just keep going on and on and on and on than it is to condense it into like with the perfect thing that needs to be said. I was listening to a really good podcast that has nothing to do with business. Well, in some ways, I guess it does. Do you ever watch Lex Fridman?
Oh, yeah. Oh, listen
He listened.
on the
Okay. Yeah. I
bike.
watched it on
Yeah.
YouTube. He recently, did you see his 8.5 hour podcast that just came out?
No,
So
no.
basically, he interviewed Elon Musk, but then the entire Neuralink team, his little chip that they're putting in brains,
Right.
and the first patient who has it installed in his brain. And in Elon Musk's portion of the interview, he was talking about uh, just getting things down to what is essential. And in their engineering processes, he always says that if you're not having to add back 10% of what you've removed, you're not removing enough.
Ooh,
And I think that's a really good framework for overhead is that, it's really hard to remove things because you're like, well, is this the right time to remove it? Or maybe we're going to need this. Maybe we should wait a little bit. Well, it's there for a reason. Like it has potential, right? Maybe it's an employee, maybe it's a software you don't use that much. Maybe it's office space that's dead. Well, we could grow into it. Like, if we add those, 2 more salespeople, they'll use that space, whatever it might be. But basically his perspective is you need to remove, and even remove to the point where you need to add back because you were too quick to remove something or because you were too, what's the term? You were pruning too much that you
yeah,
had to add it
yeah.
back. Right. And so I think that's maybe a good approach. And really, I'm speaking to myself here. There's so many things, whether it's software or maybe employees in the past that I just haven't used. And there's potential there. Like I can see the upside of having it, but we just aren't using it. And so anyways, I think that's a really good approach to
No, I really like that. I'll use it. I tell you,
it.
one of the reasons, if we start looking at places to prune overhead, uh, I'll it's what you said, it's just hard because you're used to it. You
Mhm.
brought whatever it was on for a reason, and now you're not sure. I think one of the first things you look at every item on your profit and loss statement that is down under expenses, and which is where overhead is, and say, if I didn't have that, would I add it today? And if the answer is no, then you need to get rid of it today. And
Yeah.
that's one of the most difficult places. I mean, I can name places where we frequently, let's say, call it easier targets that we frequently can find. Their insurance. My insurance friends are not going to like me for bringing that up, but insurance tends to be, you get insurance, whether it's liability or auto or workers' comp, based on something at some time. And then it's 2 years later before you think about it again and you go look at it. You find that if you let it out to bid, that you can get it cheaper again. Insurance just seems to do that. Now, the cost is not the entire thing. A lot of times, you have to have the right agent. But anyway, that's a place to look. The really, really, really hard one is people. And almost every business, and certainly every business I've been talking to for the last month, because it's a subject that's come up, we have people that are just not sure that they contribute more than they cost. And people meaning me, the boss, tend to put that off because we have this, because they're people, right? And it's one of the toughest decisions to make. But that is a place where I've recently hit upon, when you let somebody go, don't replace them. That should be your first thought. And I've had that happen with several clients in the last couple of weeks. Somebody quit, or they finally had to let somebody go. They start immediately looking, and I say, stop. Somebody costs you $40,000 a year. Maybe you can get people to do their job for $1 an hour more, right?
Yeah.
Somebody does it half the job for $1 an hour more, and another one does it for 50 cents. Well, $1 an hour more for full-time is $2,000 a year, right? So that's an opportunity. I always look at when somebody leaves as being a great opportunity to reduce overhead by not picking it back up. The rest of it, the real exercise that I use is the one I mentioned. We look at everything and say, if I didn't have that, whether it's software, machine, whatever it is, if I didn't have that, would I do it today? And if the answer is no, then I got to get rid of it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. When an employee leaves, there's a lot of opportunity there. I think there are these business events that happen that are, blessings in disguise, if you will, where you lose the employee or you have to let someone go and it sucks, it's hard. But in reality, there's great opportunity there. And, you mentioned, waiting to hire the next person and, just giving raises to people on staff to take more responsibility. But there's also lots of other ways of handling it. Sometimes that employee was doing a lot of processes that aren't essential to your business and really should just be eliminated in the first place. They were around for 6 years. The process is outdated. Their role really doesn't apply anymore. But then there's ways of outsourcing it, where that's using new software and tools like AI, where that's finding a service that's out there that'll do it for a fraction of what you were paying the full-time employee. But there's a lot of different strategies of getting the same output or even more output with less. I think another thing I wanted to think about with overhead is it's kind of like the lifestyle of business, is the way that I would think about it. When someone gets a salary increase and they buy the bigger home, or they buy the boat, or they get the new car, whatever it is, it's a change to their lifestyle. And there's this saying that, once you fly first class, you'll never fly economy again, because the experience is so nice and you're so used to it. It's the comfort. Or you stay in the 5-star hotel and it's like, wow, I could never stay at a Holiday Inn again. And I think it's the same thing in your business with your overhead. You get the new software, or you get the new employee on staff, and it's like, oh, like, wow, this is comfortable. And so it's way harder to go back to how it was in the leaner days. So anyways, that's just another thought I had about how to, approach overhead. It's just like your lifestyle. You don't want to just, because you're making more money, have more expenses. You want to reduce as much as possible and stay at that amount until you absolutely can't. And that brings up a really good, really strategy that you have for taking on new overhead expenses. And it comes from, I believe, a client or someone that you talk to in terms of when they want something new.
Yeah, if you need a new machine, you're driving around, you think you need a new machine, you need a new computer, you need a new software package, just wait a month and say, did I miss it last month? And then wait a month again and then wait a month again. And you might find that you never did hit the point where you said, I've got to have that. And obviously, if you do have to have it, if it will justify itself, then it's the prudent thing to get it, which kind of brings me to another way to rephrase how to look at your overhead, and that is to do a cost benefit analysis. Now, that may not be immediately clear how workers' comp saves you, what's the cost of workers' comp and what's the benefit of it? Well, it's pretty large benefit. You'd be operating it inappropriately, illegally, at great risk without it. So it's worth doing. But other things like maybe you have 2 copiers. I have a client that has 2 copiers that each cost about $600 a month, and they're in different locations in the office. And I'll grant you, if we get rid of one, which I'm agitating for, somebody's going to have to walk a little further. But it's $600 a month. Depending on the size of your company, I don't know how much $600 a month means to you, but it means something to most of my clients. That's a win if you can get rid of $600
absolutely.
a month. Your marketing is a big expense. It's typically an overhead because it's a monthly expense. It's not related immediately to how much you sell. And you need to track, and I'll let you talk more about how to do that, but you need to know the benefit that you're getting from your marketing and make decisions accordingly. And that's a hard thing to do. Well, it can be a hard thing to do. It can be an easy thing to do too if it works out right. But you need to track your marketing and cut your marketing if it's not working, but stick with it if it is working. So I don't know. I'll let you talk a little bit more about how to.
Sure. I mean, with the
grab on
marketing
that.
stuff, you have to differentiate between what is performance marketing versus what is just branded marketing. What I mean by that, performance marketing is Google ads, Facebook ads, something where you're putting in a dollar amount that's really clear and you can clearly track results like clicks or purchases or visits, whatever that is. With the branded stuff, there's things that you're doing marketing wise, like going to that golf tournament and being a sponsor of it, or being part of this association, or whatever it is, like the networking type things, or your website is up. Those things cost money, and you're not going to be able to clearly say every single time that, hey, because we sponsored that golf tournament, we got these exact sales. What's going to happen of your website being up is you're not going to track every single dollar that comes to your website, but you know that it's a business card for your business and people are seeing it and it's generating leads, or, even the people that you're sending proposals to are going to check your website. So it's, nurturing that sale. When you go to the golf tournament, you're building relationships with new people that may not buy from you for years, but there's value in it because it establishes relationship. And so you just need to be careful on how you approach, cutting marketing and all these kinds of things. I am for cutting marketing a lot of times. That is, hey, we have 5,000 in Google ads. Well, let's see if we can bring that down and get more organic. The performance marketing is the area that I would look to cut first. I think that there's aspects of the branded marketing that you're doing, regularly and you've done for a long time that have gotten you to where you are, that you probably should maintain to some degree. So anyways, that's more of a marketing conversation and KPIs around that. But with overhead, something that I think about a lot in terms of managing it is the subscriptions, because every business out there has so many different subscriptions, from what you're using for email, what you're using for your Google Drive, all these different tools that are out there for software, for sales, project management, estimating, 1Password for your password security, and for Slack communication workplace. And there's just infinite almost subscriptions out there, and everyone tries to get on that subscription model because it's predictable revenue for their business, and it allows them to sell their business at a higher multiple.
And you'll be the one who forgets to cancel it, so you'll pay for 2 years after you realize you didn't need it. Yeah.
So, a few strategies with these subscriptions, and it could be a variety of subscriptions. It could be a cleaning service that you subscribe to. It doesn't have to necessarily be software, but any sort of subscription model that you have, a really good strategy for this is having a dedicated credit card for subscriptions. That way it's a really, I mean, yes, on your books, you should be able to see subscriptions very, very easily, but it's a lot easier when you just log into the credit card app and see what all is coming out of that account every month. It's much easier to notice, oh man, we're paying for that when it's on that credit card bill. And then it's all just organized on that one card. But what's also great about that is something, you're having a hard time with a certain subscription, you can cancel a credit card very easily uh, and not have to deal with that subscription anymore if it comes to that. I've seen situation where it does come to that, where you need to just cancel a card to get rid of some stuff. And that's also a good strategy is, hey, cancel the card and then see what you really need that you've messed up with. And then you can put the new card on. I heard someone talk about that with their wife. They give their wife a new credit card every 6 months and cancel it so that there's all these subscriptions that their wife paid for that just go away that we don't need anymore.
Hey, I know a woman who did that and took away her husband's credit card.
There you go.
Now we're
equal.
Yeah. I'm paying attention.
Paying attention. No. So then the other thing that you can do with these subscriptions is rather than go monthly, go yearly. And this isn't for every subscription, but if you can afford to go yearly, especially on the bigger softwares, one, it forces you to think about the decision differently. Oh, it's only $20 a month. Yeah, let's do it. Right? Where you just go ahead and accept it. But when you think about it on an annual basis, it's a much higher dollar amount. So you give it a little more thought. So that's the first thing. The next thing is you're going to get a discount. They really want to go annual with you. And so if you'll pay annually, you'll get a discount from what you would pay monthly. So you're getting it cheaper. The next thing you can do is right away, you can turn off auto renew, meaning it's not going to, after 1 year, it's not going to charge you again. Right. And sometimes some companies won't let you turn off auto renew, but you can cancel the next day and you've already paid. So you've canceled. So it's going to end after that year. But what that does is now, if we're not using that software or that subscription, it's going to go away after a year and we're not going to have to worry about it. Right. So it just forces you to reduce without, putting a lot of the decision making into it. It's just already going to reduce from your business. It's going to reduce your overhead. So anyways, those are some small strategies with subscriptions that I would think about. Also just thinking about your business as a lifestyle, as a person, and just because you make $1,000 in a month extra 1 month doesn't mean that you're going to go and spend $1,000 on a meal with your wife or your spouse. That wouldn't be sound decision making every single month to do that. Oh, we got this. Let's spend it on all this restaurant food. The same thing with overhead. Can you make wise decisions to have a very lean lifestyle of your business, a lean business to operate more efficiently? So, yeah. What else have we not covered about overhead? Any mistakes or misconceptions people have?
Well, one thing overall to manage overhead, you need to first not add it unless you absolutely have to. You have to understand why you're doing that clearly. Not like, oh, it'll help. It'll save me some time. No, if you're bringing somebody on or something on, what specifically you want to do, and do you have a real reason for doing it? If you don't do it. Second thing is pay attention. And this, I think, might answer your question. The paying attention means if you get your financial statement every month, you look at your profit and loss and you look at every item on your profit and loss. Things that you missed the first time, you might be saying, what is that? Sometimes overhead, although we're always referring to it as a monthly charge, but sometimes insurance might come in 2 installments. So you're going along thinking your overhead is this, and then you hit a certain month and it happens to be $11,000 more than that. And you go, what the hell's that? And you look and you go, oh, it's my insurance. Then it prompts you to start thinking. So if you look on a regular basis, just look and ask yourself the question we talked about. If I had to do it today, if I hadn't already done that, and I had to do it today, would I? If the answer is no, figure out a way to stop it, right?
Yeah.
So that paying attention, you'll come to understand what it is. You'll come to not, if you work for a month to decrease your overhead $1,000, you'll be a little bit more cautious when an opportunity pops up that's going to cost you $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
Because I had to work so hard to get rid of it. I'm going to make a better decision about not increasing again. So anyway, I'm quite certain that a lot of people don't understand or work on their overhead a lot, because if I ask people generally, how much do you have to sell to break even? They'll give me the total of all their expenses, fixed and variable. I say, well, it doesn't work that way. And it's good to understand the difference and pay attention.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this is a helpful episode for people to understand overhead in their business a little bit better, get the wheels turning on how they can not increase their overhead, how they can approach decision-making around overhead a little bit differently. If there's things that we missed, things that you want to discuss on overhead, questions you have, please reach out to us. We've got our emails down in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And subscribe to our newsletter. I just sent our newsletter for this week out today. If you'd like to get those emails notifying you about episodes we put out with a little bit more perspective on the topic, you can subscribe in the show notes and follow us on LinkedIn. Martin's LinkedIn's linked in the profile. Mine is. We'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you for all you do to support our show, and hope you have less stress, more time, more money in your business. See you later, Martin.
Thanks, Khalil.
Thanks for tuning in to the Cash Flow Contractor. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Visit thecashflowcontractor.com. See you next episode.